TV. Hi, I'm Alex Russell. I'm a software engineer on the web platform team in San Francisco for Google, and I am nominally the super TL, Uber TL, whatever we call it, which is to say the person who doesn't do any actual engineering anymore for Fugu at Google. And well, I did want to talk about a lot of the stuff that we've got done over the last year, and I guess I'll start with a couple of stats off the top of my head. Apologies, I don't have slides today. On the one hand, anything I put together would look pathetic next to Namrata's slides later for UX. But also, you have peer reviews as opposed to slides this morning. You're welcome. So I wanted to go over some of the things that you've accomplished because as overhead, I don't do anything anymore. You do it. So over the last year, you have picked up a bunch of the things that we started in the Fizz era, and you've run them all the way to completion. We made a bunch of promises in conversations with partners back in 2015 and 2016, and in some cases we didn't carry them through, and there was a real chance that we were going to continue to drop those balls in ways that really hurt the ability of those developers to deliver a good experience for their users. So things like the shape detection API, being able to scan barcodes. In a lot of places where we come from, for a lot of our team, that doesn't seem like a huge deal. However, this is central to commerce in a lot of the world. It is the easiest way to write down a URL for a lot of people who have a hard time writing. And it makes web applications super competitive. In the same way, we knew back in 2015 and 2016 when we started to work with partners on mobile progressive web apps that getting an OTP from an SMS was gonna be a big deal. And if you had to copy it out of your SMS application, that was going to be painful. Whereas the native applications just had this easy logon flow. And I can think of multiple ride hailing and other sorts of services that have done this. And you, as a group, have gone and revived these efforts, taken them, from early explorations. I think that's as far as I can say we went before. And you've taken them all the way through now with SMS OTP, going to origin trials now. And with shape detection, I think we're on, aren't we? Yeah, we're out to stable.
Don't ask me about shape detection.
Things like get installed related apps, where we can have low-level constant partner request for it, but we still were unsure if we could get it to a place where we could try again. You've picked up a bunch of the loose threads that I and others had regretted dropping, and you've made good on a bunch of promises. And so in that spirit, the thing that I'm really excited about is that we're all here. So we had a sort of a Google-only Fugu get-together brainstorming thing that I think had something like 13 or 14 people at it in February, I believe, in Sydney. And we had 50 signups today. More than 20% of you are non-Googlers, which is incredible to me. We've more than doubled the amount of firepower going into expanding the capabilities of the web platform over the past year. And so I could continue to enumerate all the things that we're doing. That is to say, we've got 4 APIs currently in origin trials. We've closed a bunch of other ones. 78 is looking great. We've got tons of stuff in the pipeline. 79 is looking good. 80 has stuff. We're picking back up from the Fizz effort where for a good 2 and change years there, every release had a Fizz API or a meaningful addition to an existing API. We're picking back up that pace. And so that's what we have done, but it's not what we're doing. What we're doing is something it's a project that is very different than the set of features that we're delivering. Because if you look around the room, it would not surprise some folks, or it would surprise some folks to find out that Hongchan is here and Namrata is here, and what in the world do low-level audio and UX have to do with each other? And what in the world does the native file system API have to do with SMS OTP? It is a bit of a weird one. So what we're not, in the same way that we got to the airport, not by expending stored energy and turning it into kinetic energy. That's what we happened to do to get to the airport. But what we were doing is going to the airport to get here. What we're doing is making the web competitive. So it would be easy to believe that a lot of us are doing this just because it's our job. I think we all know better. The folks who are working on this project and working on the web platform in general all have choices. We could all, at least if you're a Googler, you could all go work in cloud. You could spend your one and only life working on ML. You could do that. You could make a bunch of choices that you know that the organization would think highly of, and instead you're doing this. And I know that that's true for folks who are here from other organizations as well. We're choosing to work on a very specific set of problems that matter to a set of developers who, have asked for a lot and have come to expect very little. So why are we doing that? I think it's an important question to understand what binds us together before we get into later when we talk about specific API forms, the disagreements that we have about what they should take, or when we go to debate the various privacy and security trade-offs and we get ourselves into some sort of an uncomfortable place where we maybe disagree about approach, to remember what it is that has brought us to the place where we're working on these things together, not just because we're getting a paycheck to do it, although that's nice, but to try to remember what the project is actually meant to achieve. We didn't start Fugu as a way of ticking off a bunch of checkboxes about a random set of features that OSs happened to have. We didn't do it simply to ease the sting of the deprecations for Chrome apps that we announced on Mac and Windows and Linux. We didn't do it because we just decided that we had a lot of extra engineering laying around and we needed to give us all something to do. That kind of wasn't the project's idea of formation. So I want to step back a little bit and talk briefly about why this makes sense. So browsers are always two products. Well, browsers with their own engines anyway are always two products. Browsers with their own engines, or which contribute heavily to the development of their engine. So you can think of like Chrome in the WebKit era, right? We contributed very heavily to the development of WebKit. So when a browser is invested in its engine very heavily, it is at least two products. On the one hand, it is a product for developers, and on the other hand, it is a product for end users. And so it is frequently the case that we, as organizations, focus on only one of those at a time and fail to see how they reinforce each other's value. And so if you're starting a new browser project today, if you were just going to go quit your current job and start a brand new browser, what you would do is you would focus relentlessly on compatibility. You would start your project saying, how can I render all of the world's content today? And you would take it as a fixed thing that there is a body of valuable content that you would want to have work inside of your new browser product. Because if you consider the platform only from the product aspect, you can end up in a situation where looking backwards is all you need to do. You can count on a stable, large, and valuable body of content to exist. Now, that works pretty well on desktop today. I hazard a guess to say that collectively, we're killing it. We're doing a good job. We've got this. The web on desktop is a growing fraction of how users experience their day-to-day work. And that has contributed to their safety, to their productivity, to their ability to choose their operating system in a way that is meaningful, and insulate themselves from the worst aspects of unreasonable administrative control or unreasonable operating system choice. We've helped build for users a better world. However, most of computing is going to mobile. That is a true statement. It has been true for a decade, and the truth of that statement has only gotten more intense. And what we know about mobile today is that the web is not central to users' lives. So developers who are targeting desktop and can think about desktop independently will sit down and think about, oh, I've got to make a web thing, right? That's how I get to users on the desktop. And so then there is the constant struggle against things which would undermine the web there, right? So you could imagine maybe Electron is a potential frenemy, right? Where it posits a bunch of new features that everyone will want eventually, does it in a super unsafe way, and then there's a place for the browser to show up to help clean up some of those messes. That's potentially a very good future for us. But that comes on the basis of web content being the de facto way to build those experiences in the first place. Whereas on mobile, that's not the situation that we're in. So what is it that binds all these projects together? Why does SMS OTP retriever matter? Like, I mean, I think we could come up with an answer for, in a desktop-centric world, why doing window placement is a really great thing to do to service customers who would otherwise go to a competing, frenemy platform. Well, platforms depend critically on the belief by their developer base that they're going to succeed. So if you consider, this is where I was going to do slides and I have not. If you consider the loop that a browser product, that like you start a new browser tomorrow, and the loop that you are engaged in as the manager of that product is that you think about services and content as a fixed body of stuff. That is to say, developers have already made a bunch of services and content that you just need to run, and then you need to make it better. So you can make a product that can service the user about those services and content. And if you do a good job and iterate on it, you will get more users. Users will choose your product, which will then, they will use the services and content that you are the window to from. This is the pretty basic browser loop. However, if you think about this loop from the perspective of someone who is building a developer platform, the timescales get much longer. And the reasons for building out a developer platform are much dicier. Why in the world would anyone take this really tight loop where you can make your product somewhat better and grow this, right? Treat it like a flywheel spinning faster and faster and faster over time to get more users who want more services and content that are inside of the ecosystem of your product, which you can just make better, right? You don't have to think about the content. It's exogenous to you. It exists outside of your efforts and is something that you couldn't affect if you wanted to. But that's not the work that we're doing. We're doing a slightly different body of work. What we're doing, if I can get an eraser. So there are some services and content here, right? And that allows a product to succeed. But that product winds up being mediated by developers. And developers have a choice. Developers can choose an alternative platform. So the product happens to include a platform. And that platform is something that developers have to choose. When building their services and content. Our loop is longer, and it is out of the way, and it takes a lot longer to activate. It takes a lot longer to get this spinning a lot faster. So why in the heck would anyone in the world sign up for this? Because this is hard. This is slow. This is painful. The web is unique. The reason that we're doing this, I believe that the reason that most of us are in this room today is because the web is unique in this regard, because no one person owns this platform. No one company owns this platform. We're not building this platform for just ourselves and for our parochial interests. We're building it as a shared effort to continue to maintain and provide good stewardship of a system that's larger than any of us. For most of us, it existed before we got here. That is to say, we didn't make it, it's a thing, but we want it to compete. And so what does it mean for this system to continue? Well, you could continue like ZOS or OS 360. Like there's still a lot of mainframes in the world. I don't know if you know this, but I looked up the mainframe sales statistics and revenue statistics for the last couple of years. It's a good time to be a COBOL programmer. It is a good time to be selling mainframes. It's a good business. We could get into it. Like I think we were all smart enough and all good enough. We could go do that with our lives. In the same way that we could go make, cloud backends or do ML. We have choices about how to spend this one and only life, and we're choosing to do it on the web. Why? Well, I think that most of us are doing that because we think that the web has intrinsic value, not just because it's multiply owned and has stewardship that comes from multiple places in tension with each other, but also because it is valuable to users. It is currently a good version of computing. And I think, I don't know if maybe you don't agree with this, but I fear losing that future for computing. I look at a lot of native, especially mobile environments, and think this is strictly worse for users. We need to deliver what we did on desktop to those users. And so I think what binds us together is competitiveness. And competitiveness shows up by convincing developers that they can trust us with their investment in the platform that will deliver their products and services. What we're doing here, and what we're doing for the next 3 days, is to try to get to the bottom of what's keeping people from saying yes. There's a lot of other stuff that goes into the success of a product: discovery, recall, safety, security, what people believe about whether or not the product is any good. We're here to enable developers to choose to build their best experiences on the web and to help make sure that when they get there, they don't feel stuck. They can have confidence and faith that when they want a new capability, that they will be able to get it. Which brings me to my very last point. We have an ace in the sleeve, which is that the web is something that exists on lots of different platforms. But we also have a bunch of negatives. So you'll hear, and I hear all the time from people in other parts of the company at Google, that we will never be able to deliver, the shiniest, newest API. So someone comes up with a new API for, touch bar is a great example. Thanks, Thomas. Someone comes up with a touch bar, puts it on one piece of hardware. Okay, that's interesting. How much the world's computers have that? What fraction? Most of the laptops in this room have a touch bar. Just looking around. However, as a fraction of the world's computing, that's actually pretty minimal. I mean, 6% of total desktop shipments, and then a fraction of that is laptops. So, I mean, you're still talking about total market penetration for all of computing below 3%, right? Because mobile is the larger fraction of all computing today than desktop. So, should we build an API for a 3% thing? This is a tension that is at the core of what we're doing. And I'd like to provide a quick model for how to think about the projects that our group inside of Chromium is committed to taking on. The model that I've expressed is that we will help developers reach users about capabilities that most operating systems and most hardware have. So that is to say, if most hardware in the world has a serial port, we should give them one. If most hardware in the world has a USB connection, we should do that. If most hardware in the world can support HID, we should do that. Are these going to be lightly used in the totality of things? Yes, but we face a confidence gap today. And the confidence gap comes from a related rates problem. So if you chart out a single operating system and its capabilities and its hardware, the hardware will define the total set of things that you could potentially do with the operating system, and then the OS and the software will give you some mediated version of that. So here's OS A, right? The web, popped up 1994, and it did flowed text layout, and it did a bunch of form stuff, and it had this whole widget set, and then it kind of did this, right? It kind of didn't keep up. So the gap between what your bog stock set of hardware and operating system capabilities has continued to diverge. It has grown, and developers feel that divergence as a reason not to bet on a particular platform. Other platforms in this space could do it. Our ace in the hole is that we are now in an environment where there isn't just one operating system. The reason to do this work on the web, and the reason that we can have hope that our work is going to allow us and our developers to compete, is because they want to reach both Android and iOS and Windows. All three, it's not both, sorry, with a single code base. They want as much reach as they can possibly get, and we are the only plausible platform that can get it for them. So maybe there are disjoint sets. Maybe there are some features that are only in some operating systems. Maybe there are these lumpy pieces that aren't strictly under the union of the things in the curve. We are going to be committed with Fugu to closing this gap so that developers can believe that at some delay, over some time period. So it's not going to be instantly when everyone gets to a capability on their device, but at some delay over time, we're going to give them that capability so that the gap between what every operating system and what most users have and what the web can do doesn't grow so fast and so far out ahead of their ability to address those capabilities that they lose faith in the web. So we're in the business of conjuring up belief. It's a weird thing to say for an engineering project, but that's what we're doing. I want to thank you all for being here. This is the biggest achievement of the year, is that we have gotten all of you here to spend the next 3 days discussing what it is we can do that's most important to giving developers faith that they can get their needs addressed. And with that, I want to hand it over to Thomas to talk about the biggest problems in this space.
Hi, everyone. I introduced myself earlier, but to reiterate, I'm Thomas. I think most of you know me by now. One of the things that we did at the last Fugu Summit was getting together as a group and talking about some of the hard questions that we were facing and kind of trying to come together with a shared understanding of what our values and what our beliefs was. I think Alex just did a phenomenal job of covering some of kind of the strategic and other ways to kind of approach this problem space. But I want to make sure that we all have kind of a shared vision and shared understanding of what it is that we're really doing. And so to keep using this excellent eraser, I thought an interesting exercise could be for us to get together and try to actually face some of these different questions and problems. And so with that framing in mind, I want to pose some interesting questions. Well, I hope they're interesting. And I would like everyone to vote. Everyone has to participate, yes or no, of whether or not you agree with this statement. So this is a little bit of an experiment, but we're just going to see how this goes. And so I'm going to write a statement on the board and read it. There are some capabilities that will never come to the web. Writing takes a long time. But here we are. Everyone gets a vote. Do you agree or disagree? Show of hands if you agree with this.
Question?
Yes.
What do you mean by web?
The web, in this case,
On the web?
Chromium. Let's go with Chromium accessed either through Chrome or Edge or any other browser that adopts the Chromium project Opera.
Let me give you a quick definition of the web. The web is a set of content that can be reached to and by links.
So if I make a Chrome thing and add random capability to my, Electron app, and add something through Electron that's not.
Well, sorry, I'll add an addendum, which is that it can be reached by most users on most operating systems by just clicking on them.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So to clarify the question, let's go with the Chromium-based web, since that's the thing that we get to actually have opinions on. How many people agree with this statement?
How do you define capability?
Capability is something that you can do.
And what do you mean by web? Because if you install, you could use web technologies.
Yes.
It's still
This is
URL.
using Alex's definition of the web. I click a link and it opens a web page.
But can you save the app?
I don't know, can you?
That's a capability that we have brought to the web on many browsers now.
Yeah, that would be one example of a capability.
That's what gives you installation.
Okay, but it seemed like there was a good show of hands of people thinking that there were some capabilities that could never be done. Why? Any people who raised their hand, what are some of the capabilities that you think can't be done, and why do you think they can't be done? I'm going to pick on Beverly because I saw his hand first.
I think that there is a certain class of operating system level capability that would really be undesirable to expose to the web from a privacy perspective. For example, the accounts that you're logged in with, nearby discovered, like any sort of UI that has to be shown, or like your other devices, things like that, capabilities of those, things like a device identifier that is unique to the device that you're on, which are really frequently used by native applications. Classes of capabilities that are available today, but that we know that computing platforms of tomorrow will remove because they introduced them naively and found out that it was a terrible idea.
Do you have a example?
Life ID.
Okay.
Which is super frequently used today. Primitives for things like DRM or poking a hole for the view.
Thomas, can you briefly summarize those out loud so we get it on the recording?
Yes. To summarize those out, what Beverly just mentioned is that there are some things like device ID and other things which are, sounds like specific to kind of the device and access that we won't be able to bring to the web due to various privacy considerations and potential malicious actors. Any other contributions to this notion? Yeah, Riley.
So to somewhat rebut Peter's point.
Yes, this is happening. Good. This is what we want.
So for the last, I don't know, 15 years, every operating system I've installed, I've gotten from the web. Like everything that I've done in computing starts in the web. You know, when I install a new copy of Windows, I open IE and I download Chrome, and that was using the web. I keep using Edge though.
Aww.
You don't have a process level sandbox.
Right. So that was why I asked, what is a capability? Because the question is, what capability? Like it's not a question of what. The question is, how hard was it for me to do that? You know, I can download a whole new browser using the web, and is that a web capability? The ability to install a new browser, or is that just sort of a side effect of the fact that I'm on an operating system that allows me to download native code and execute it?
Very interesting. To summarize, I think Riley's point was that there are many things that happen through the web today, including downloading other browsers, and basically everything we do today, at least on desktop, basically happens through the web one way or another. And it's just a matter of the route that you take, whether you're installing a native piece of software that you just downloaded from the web, or whether or not you're just accessing the web directly. Kind of everything happens through the web one way or another. Cool. Any other thoughts? Anyone would like to rebut Riley's point? Because that would make me really happy. No? No? Okay.
You haven't asked folks who want to say no, right? You mentioned
True. All right. Let's.
So my rebuttal, the point was, no capability is not available.
Okay, I like it. So then, how many people disagree with this statement? Yeah, Victor. All right. Yeah. We got Joe. Nice. Any comments on why?
So all these things that look dangerous are dangerous whether they're done on the web or not. Like all the things there, I've seen sites that, or even not sites, basically exploits where people get tricked into using the native UIs and doing the wrong things. So I don't think that the fact that that UI comes from a browser is much worse than if it comes from the OS. Like having the UI to do something that's a restricted capability in the OS doesn't make it magically okay.
Nice. Beverly. Yes.
I think that there is one significant difference. Most native OSs today are moving towards a world in which there's a gatekeeper blocking installation, which provides reviews, but also the ability to revoke installations or even to undo entire installations on platforms if malicious behavior is found. For the web, we've got things like safe browsing and other browsers that's something similar, but that still doesn't uninstall things.
Tom.
At the same time with permissions, the browser could unilaterally revoke your permissions.
Excuse me, Thomas. Could you repeat what they're saying?
Yes. So for the recording, there's an interesting discussion between Victor and Beverly that I cannot possibly do justice. But to very briefly summarize, Victor's point is that the browser acts much like an operating system effectively and can take the same kind of actions and do things like revoke permissions, similar to what an operating system could do. I really wish we had a microphone. Fucking MVP over here. Let's see if this works.
Test.
Thank you.
I'm freed.
And I will summarize Peter's point, which I thought was very important, in that on native apps, there is an app store that's gate kept, and the gatekeeper has the ability to uninstall malicious apps after the fact.
Mm.
And there is at least a perception that we don't have comparable abilities on the web.
Nice. Tom.
Yeah, so when we look at our PWA security model now, it's origin-based. So we have this very strict, a PWA can't read any other PWA's files, for example. But at some point, probably we want to enable that, because if you think native file system, VS Code, whatever on the web, it could be very interesting to then do also automatic things like, I don't know, virus scan. So you could have a virus scanner PWA that would, by definition, have to look at other PWA's files. Will this ever happen? I don't know. I was the group that said some capabilities probably will never make it to the web, but yeah, maybe. We like it's a super dangerous Fugu fish that we're cutting. The amount of eatable fish gets smaller and smaller. But yeah, I think this could be very interesting, like virus scanning, these kind of security sandboxing. Peter just mentioned it. It's going to be interesting.
Great. So, okay, you know what? I'm not going to write this statement out, because you know what? Writing takes a really long time. So we're just going to do this verbally. The next statement that I want to kind of get the room's feel on is the importance of whether or not people are accessing these web applications that we're empowering through the browser, or whether or not people using Chromium is actually the end result. So I guess the statement would be, we succeed as a team if people everywhere use Chromium, but not through the browser. How many people agree with that statement? This would be Electron, this would be native applications using Chromium, this would be WeChat, any other platforms that adopt Chromium, but don't actually do it through a browser with links and whatnot. Does anyone consider that success? Anyone? Come on, please. Yeah.
I'm gonna bite.
Yes.
Yes, said you.
Okay, tell me why.
Hi. Okay. So there's mixed success. It is more successful if the web, as users can experience via browsers, has the capabilities and the traffic, but we share such a large amount of technology stack. If there are experiences that developers ship in Electron or other hybrid type apps, but they predominantly use the technology that we build, it is much more likely for them to also bring those capabilities or experiences to the web. And I think that that is a success. So it's about the network effect of developer mindshare and the delta between making that experience available on the web or a similar experience like that in the future.
Yeah, I think that's a really excellent point. I think it is very easy for us as kind of a web platform, as Chrome or Edge, to look at solutions like Electron and kind of consider that the enemy or something like that. But I personally strongly believe that is not the case. And I think that Electron has done amazing things for the web. I do. Competition, I think, is a slightly strong word, but I do think that we're in competition. If I had to say yes or no, yes, I would say that we are in competition with Electron, but it's the like kind of friendly, kind competition where they support us and actually want us to succeed. Riley.
I mean, I think that Electron, similar to the Chrome Apps effort, which is what I started working on when I came to Google, are in very similar positions of being places where we have a little bit more freedom to experiment with kinds of capabilities we add to the platform, and that Electron is teaching us a lot of things about what people want to do on the web. And I think that without that, we wouldn't have all of the partners that we have today. That's a little strong.
I mean, Flash taught us how to do the audio video stuff. So I'm asking, is Electron the Flash of desktop applications in the sense of, it was an unrestricted plugin that augmented web content that gave it superpowers, including audio and video and all sorts of shiny new stuff. Is that the wrong way to think about it?
I mean, I think that Flash is a 5-letter word, but yeah, no, I agree that yeah, I think that it's that it fulfills a similar role.
Personally, I always think about Spotify when this topic comes up. As a Chromebook user, I'm very happy to have the Spotify web player, and I feel like that really might not exist if something like CEF, which is what Spotify uses, or Electron didn't exist. If developers had to make a choice of, do I go native or do I go web? If that was a hard yes or like one way or the other choice, I think we'd end up seeing a lot less web exposed properties, which I think is to Vince's point.
I think Electron and the like should be viewed as complements to what we do on the web platform. It's a huge endorsement on the work we've done on the web platform because they want to use web technologies. At the same time, they may have use cases that may not fit. Sometimes we can use those, the reasons why they went to Electron to increment or build upon the web platform to diminish those use cases. At the same time, there are things that we don't have to care about. Maybe we will. For example, enterprise deployments. Some people want their browsers to work forever at a certain version. They don't want the web platform to move because their apps are old and whatever. They just don't want to invest in it. And maybe that's a fine use case, maybe not, but they get the choice. But with them developing on Electron using web technologies, I see it as a win because we can learn from this and be better.
Mike, over here.
So I agree. It's sort of a success. I see it kind of like a hybrid. Like in the car space, we kind of moved to hybrids first, and then I think we're starting to move more to full electric cars. So it shows people are starting to move in that direction. But as for success for this team specifically, our goal is to sort of fill that gap and get them all the way over. But it's a success to get sort of part of the way there in between the two, and then we want to move farther than that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. So I think that there were some kind of ideas through this that we want to, fill the gap. We want to actually be the application or be the platform that developers can trust and utilize to do the things that they need to do. I guess one question that I'm curious to then ask is, should there be a reason that an application, assuming that it's not malicious in some way, shouldn't be on the web? Are there examples that you can think of an application where we wouldn't want to support it, assuming that it's not like malicious or trying to actively harm people? Are there some things that don't belong on the web? And what are some examples of that? Anyone? Joe.
I have heard about new app of how do I say this? Certain medical applications that have where something that was implanted was tied into an app on the phone, on a person's mobile phone, as a way to interact with that device. I think one thing that would concern me if I were trying to build such an application is that an operating system, building to an operating system, seems to have a much lower level of volatility than a web application, and particularly with issues with health and safety, I would prioritize stability over anything else.
Very interesting. I do think it's an interesting position to be in as we make the web and Chromium more of a kind of OS level platform. I think some of the things that are coming through in this discussion is the fact that we're very much an application platform sitting on top of an application platform, which in this case is the operating system. And the lines get even more interesting when you have things like Chrome OS, and other kind of like web-based operating systems. KaiOS, great example. Yeah. Okay. So this thing, the segment of the agenda is nominally called retrospective. So I guess I wanna close out by asking, is there any question that anyone in this room would like to pose to everyone else? Are there any things that you've been wondering about, things that you want to get a sense of from the Fugu team of what are our values or where do we stand on a particular point? These were kind of my ideas, but I'd love to hear Tom's.
So my understanding is there has been a Fizz team, and probably before the Fizz team, there has been something else. If there's anything back in those days we could undo, given today's learnings today, where we are now, what would it be? So I guess this is for the Eng elders. Maybe Alex? I don't know.
Or Beverly? Or Vince? Patron saints of long lost capabilities, efforts.
I can think of approaches we would have taken that were different, right? So from my perspective, the work that we have been doing has been sort of graciously down the same line, right? We haven't really changed the directionality of it in any meaningful way. There are places where we hadn't, for instance, reformed all the way we worked in standards, right? We hadn't, figured out how to do incubation with our friends at Microsoft yet. We hadn't figured out how to take certain things all the way through the standards process in a low drama way. Like I can think of like a lot of Peter's experience with push notifications come to mind. So there are places where we would have taken a very different tactical approach. There are places where we would have been more aggressive, I think. We had there's a lot of internal Google politics around everything, and so that has changed the trajectory of various projects over time. Because so much of what we have worked on has been limited by the imagination of the folks around us, there's some part of this which is also, I don't know, maybe Vince, you've got a similar viewpoint on this, but I've come to understand that we have to show that the world can be different and it won't blow up before people will trust us with the next quantum of stuff.
I think those are good points. I'm curious to, Peter's working on his thoughts, so I want to hear his thoughts as well. So around, I've been pushing capabilities for a long time in various forms. Before Fizz, my slice of the world was Chrome apps. And I jumped into Chrome apps because I'd been doing some powerful things on the web standards space, and it was challenging and difficult to move forward. And at that time, Chrome OS was very new and needed capabilities to allow classes of applications to run. And we had a plan, which was to put these things out in a proprietary API space. And then after we had done that, then slowly work on bringing them to the web platform, which we are executing on quite well, although I had no idea I would still be working on this so many years later. I think one of the things I regret is we put out these APIs for Chrome apps, and we got a certain amount of interest and attention from developers, especially in the education market. And that success wasn't championed enough. And it was there, but it sort of was, in comparison to other things, just kind of left in the background. And we did an early deprecation of those proprietary APIs on everything except for Chrome OS. And I don't think we handled that deprecation well. And I think that we lost some developer mindshare from people and businesses that otherwise would have come along very nicely to the web. And we needed to provide a more graceful on-ramp for them to transition. So I'm disappointed, that we didn't organizationally take this long view of we'll take as much time as we need to move that community. Some of those we have been bringing over. A simple example with Bluetooth is Pocket Lab, a small startup. They run on multiple operating systems in the education market. They had a Chrome app. They use Web Bluetooth. They love it. They're able to develop very cost effectively because of it. But I can also think of other developers that we didn't get to move over. For example, I don't think we got Sphero to move over. They have a little robot you can drive around. And I wish we had, maintained that.
Hey, Vincent.
Yeah.
Could I ask for you to expand on that case of losing developer mindshare with just an example? Like, what does that mean? Did we lose a company, or was there a person or a group of people that just lost confidence? Like, what was that? Like, what's one case that you have in mind about that?
So, yeah, repeating the question, how did we lose developer mindshare? What does that look like? What's an example? We put out Chrome apps, and we didn't have a perfect understanding of who was even using the APIs. We announced a deprecation, and we did collect a lot of feedback from the community saying, oh, but I need, I use these APIs, I like them. And we did a moderate amount of trying to aggregate that together and summarize it. I don't think we had sufficient partner engagement to even have clean stories about who we did or did not lose. So what we know that we saw was people noticed that we were turning these APIs off. And I don't know how many individual developers in future product meeting decision points said, oh, okay, I want to build whatever education product, or I want to build a controller for drones, or whatever it is they were going to do, who decided like, well, I don't trust that the web is going to do this, or I'm going to move away from the web platform. I'm going to go with the Android platform because that solves my need on that, one particular area. Some other concrete examples are in Bluetooth, for example. I mentioned Sphero. I don't think we got that company to move over, and I don't have the full story, right? I didn't get an explanation about exactly, what was going on, and it could be multifaceted. But the fact that we put up additional friction certainly didn't make it easier for them to maintain their product on the web. So, I think they still have a Chrome app up. It kind of works with their products. And some of that could have theoretically been moved. Some of it didn't.
There's one place where we've course corrected between Fizz and Fugu. So for those of you who weren't at Google or aren't at Google at the time, Fizz was sort of the predecessor project that where we spun up web push notifications and add to home screen and installability for PWAs and a bunch of other capabilities like durable storage, sort of all as sort of an umbrella project to go tackle the capability gap. To build confidence with developers. One of the big changes we made between Fizz and Fugu is that this is an open meeting, right? We're having this under the Chromium contributor sort of umbrella, whereas almost everything to do with Fizz, we took to the standards forums and didn't have this sort of open engineering level contact where we deprived ourselves of a bunch of both goodwill, because we did work as hard as we could in the open, and we made some mistakes there, but we didn't build this community in that process, and that's a mistake that we're late to rectify, but we are doing now. So hopefully this is not a bad time for you.
I might as well answer Thomas's original question from a Microsoft perspective too. We expect developers we want to provide them the right platforms to choose how they wish to build their apps. So we expect native apps will continue. Some developers will want to choose to build their even hybrid apps. There will be some developers that want to use the web rendering surface, but have some native capability they want to leverage. But we don't want them to not choose the web because of lack of capabilities. We would love the web to be just as capable of a platform. Of course, the web has a different threat model, so there's a bunch of challenges we would need to figure out there as well. But Microsoft has a lot of applications, for example, building on Electron. We'd love to see a world where the web is capable enough that they can bet on PWAs.
Nice, thank you.
To add some,
Hey, yeah, excellent. To add some thoughts between the differences between the Fizz effort and now the Fugu effort, whether we would do something differently is a question that's quite close to me, with push notifications and the permission prompts being everyone's favorite part of the internet. I think that in some ways, I wouldn't really do much differently there. We shipped quite aggressively. We did something new. We did something that was just groundbreakingly new, because it's the sort of ability that wasn't possible on the web yet. We did make mistakes, obviously, quite a lot of them, but so do most projects, I guess. But one of the things that I would change there is listen more to the industry. So we put a lot of effort on what sort of permission model would we want websites to do. We had all our documentation saying, yeah, have a page on your site explaining why you're asking for permission these things, while our native permission affordances didn't allow that sort of explanation by themselves. So we put the best efforts out of there, but what we got back from the industry is that they did A/B measurements with having such sign-up page and just asking on page load, and all their metrics were 10 times better if they did not ask the user. And with a feature that monetizes so well, we can preach all we want that that's what we want developers to do, but if their metrics say the opposite, then it's just not going to happen. I think we should have put more libraries, more examples out there, and be much more descriptive in how we should be doing things, rather than trying to figure out those answers by ourselves. And in retrospect, particularly for push notifications, we limited ourselves to too few external parties in understanding how this would be used, which led to too much conservativeness from us in some places, but to be too aggressive in other places.
If you were giving past self advice about the tools we now have, right? We didn't have UCAM at the time. There's a bunch of like sort of just operational level things that are better about the current environment. If you were giving yourself advice, what would you tell that person to do as they were walking through the process of, building out the mocks for the permission flow and taking the spec through the standards process?
I would have had a lot less good faith in developers. And I think we might even have been a little bit too optimistic about the lack of abuse. We had a lot of safeguards in place that over the years got removed because abuse was quite low. And then suddenly the popularity of the feature just exploded, and we weren't ready to deal with it. And we were in a position, we still are, and Balas and his team are doing an amazing effort there to try to fix it, particularly the notification spam problems.
I think personally just speaking, I think that there's an interesting part where Fugu, at least in my experience so far, has been a lot more about kind of security and whether or not users will get, owned or, in other ways have their security compromised. Whereas, specifically push notifications was one of those examples where very, well-intended actors, applications that offered real value to users, we're still heavily incentivized to, aggressively push these things. And I'm interested to see how that pans out for Fugu.
I think there's one more thing I'd like to mention, and that is that in retrospect, I would have liked us to push for installability much, much earlier. For a lot of these powerful APIs, if you want to open Visual Studio Code, for example, you don't go to visualstudiocode.com or something like that. You want to have an icon. You want a good way of being able to open it, and you want it to be where you expect it to be. You want it to behave like a normal native application would behave, and it should be there. And for a lot of, for example, we're seeing this in mobile for offline-enabled APIs. We're now kind of at the point where the capabilities that we offer to developers in the offline space with periodic background sync, background fetch, and stuff like that, we're sufficiently further ahead than developers are that it doesn't really make sense to continue investing there because they have to catch up. They just have to be where we are. And then listening to them, much of the problem of why a lot of developers aren't creating a better offline experience is because the discoverability isn't there. How, like, you would never open a browser while you're offline, and then you're kind of creating a situation in which you have to be installed in order for offline to be a sufficient benefit, and only a very, very small portion of PWAs are installed. And just kind of combining the platform and the browser more. For example, let's have a website be able to tell the browser that it's offline enabled. Let's have browsers have a specialized view for, hey, we see that the user is offline, so let's surface this content that we know to be offline available. Create an incentive for developers to actually start using those APIs by rewarding them for it. And I think if we did that earlier, we would be in a different space there too.
Yeah, really interesting.
One more thing, I think with 2020 hindsight and a time machine, embracing as aggressively as possible the extensible web manifesto and refusing to build higher level opinionated APIs in favor of recognizing that things like a database API is really exposing storage capabilities, and we should build low level storage capabilities. Web audio. Should we have built web audio, or should we have dove down and done something equivalent to low-level audio, the audio device client? Sam and I were debating on Friday still the sockets, a native sockets API, which we keep bouncing around. Is this something we should build? That one particularly challenging, but we're building it. This is also not. This is also not easy across the board. Sam was also discussing, it's never quite clear that you've gone down far enough and really discovered what the primitive is. So, but that, in hindsight, something we should have pushed harder on.
On the question of low level capabilities, though, something that I have noticed is that if you don't give people good examples of how to use a low level capability, it takes them a long time to figure it out. So, for example, in the case of USB, having good examples of how to use the API with real hardware was very helpful. If we do low-level capabilities, another example is shape detection, where like
you said not to talk.
I know.
Come on, Riley.
Where you really need it, like because of the way that it was designed to be shipped along with the polyfill, and so you really need to have someone come by and build that, because if you don't build it, developers, when you're introducing them to a new capability, they're not going to go out and build a big, complicated, high-level library to wrap around your low-level library. So low-level features are great, but you do need somebody to build a high-level capability on top of it. And if you don't, maybe nobody will for a long time.
I think to counter that a little bit, I think that we should not ignore the value of high-level capabilities either. For instance, we're now doing an origin trial with notification triggers, and the idea is that you show a notification, but in one of the properties you say, don't show it right now, show it, say, 2 hours from now. Now, you could solve that in two different ways. Either you set a precise timer, you wake up a search worker at that particular time, and then it can run its JavaScript code to show that notification. But on a mobile device, the sort of resource usage that costs to the user, like that will completely kick out the device out of any sort of idle state, and that will be a significant impact on their battery lifetime of the day. Now, multiply that by the success of the web and a lot of applications that would like to do this, and you've got a material impact to battery lifetime to user devices. Instead, if we have a property that says on the notification event that says basically like show this at this particular time, we can cast this in Java, and we just wake up this super tiny Java layer in Chrome, which is super cheap on the device, or on platforms that show that support some sort of scheduling mechanism by themselves. We just schedule it on the platform so that Chrome doesn't have to be running at all to do this action, and that brings a lot of user benefit.
That was a conversation I actually just had with Chase, who was asking me about how to approach privacy reviews for APIs, where I think that like there's a trade-off between high level and low level. That with low level you are solving a lot of use cases with one API, but it makes it a lot harder to tell what the application is actually doing with that capability because it's so low level, and that makes things like privacy and security difficult and UX difficult, because they call this function, I don't know why they called this function, like we need to display some text to the user, but we don't really know why they did it, so we can't really explain it very well. In contrast, a high-level API the site gives you a lot more information about what is it trying to do, and as you were saying, Peter, like you get to make better decisions because of that. So I think we need, I think we need both. I think maybe we'll, as we learn what people use things for, maybe we can build better high-level APIs. But Alex really wants to say something.
So when we wrote the Extensible Web Manifesto, we were writing it in the context of an unexcavated high-level system. So a thoroughly high-level system in HTML that didn't have any correspondence with the thing below it, which was JavaScript. And so we were trying to explain the archaeology project that we did with web components and why that was a reasonable path. But the situation was sort of unique where we had only the high level thing and the low level bit. But I kind of caution people from looking too deeply into that well, because you can end up in a situation where you value only the low level thing and tell people to bring their own, and they do, and that costs a lot on the wire, and that's slow and potentially bad for users, and they maybe don't even do a good job of it, and that can be a tough one. So my bias is to live to fight another day, right? Figure out the thing that's going to deliver value, and then commit yourself to the excavation project if you start high level, or do the low level thing and then commit yourself to building up the library and learning from your users, and paving the cow paths if you start low level. But I don't know that I would, at this date, suggest a strong bias in one direction or the other.
I think one thing to expand on the privacy model for low-level APIs on mobile, particularly, any sort of action that wakes up a search worker or allows the user to run the developer to run JavaScript just leaks the user's location. And for people being on the move, like by just IP location, that's a pretty big problem. And that's something that we absolutely should highlight to users, that something is happening in the background that might communicate such information to others. And this is something where I feel that a lot of native platforms are not doing well at all, outright failing. And where the web, by being inherently safe in a different way, we can add a lot of value.
To just kind of pop it back up, the original question was things that you would change from your experience with Fizz now transitioning to Fugu. I think we've gone fairly far down that path. I want to let Sam finish his point that I think he's really excited to make, and I'm excited to hear. But then after that, let's pop over and spend just 5 more minutes with anybody else who has any other kind of question they'd like to pose to the room in a retrospective form.
I entirely agree with most of what has been said. I just wanted to share a couple of mental models that I have, or one mental model that I have, an analogy that maybe will serve us. And I wanted to tell a story too about high level versus low level in my past job. The mental model that I think may be useful to have here with regards to what Riley was saying about, being, both Riley and Peter were saying about the challenges of exposing these low-level things and letting the ecosystem decide how to use them. That's absolutely challenging. But the analogy that I think, at least to me, makes sense is that of system calls and standard libraries, as well as the JDK and the JVM. In that, it's not like when you're writing C, you know what is the interrupt number of the thing, right? You use standard lib, and that is calling, you're calling fork. You're not, interrupting 43. Right? Or when you're in Java, there's a linked list implemented for you that comes as part of the JDK, right? And so this notion of standard libraries or built-in modules, or Polymer, if you may say so, right, to polyfill some of these things in a more opinionated fashion, I think complements or addresses some of the challenges with the exposing low-level ones APIs may. But so at least that's my mental model for between low level and high level. But I wanted to share a story about the challenges of also being fairly opinionated. I mean, you have some here in IndexedDB land or WebRTC land for being opinionated about high level constructs. But when I was working in search, we allowed websites to expose structured data on the page, and that would give them a snippet that would be better than blue links. And we were fairly opinionated in what that would look like. So we built like a template for how to do recipes. And so if you are a website that has recipes, we would give you the ability to say, like, expose this as a recipe in your web page, and it will give you like this nice snippet on your search result page. And what we saw the ecosystem do, and to the point that Riley did about understandability of a high-level APIs and being more privacy and security able to explain these things. A lot of websites that weren't recipe websites started exposing recipes just because they wanted that snippet. And so if you're selling shoes, for example, but you wanted that snippet to look like recipes do, you would expose all your shoes as recipes. So they were lying to us that that because they wanted to get that low level thing that of the UX that you get in search results. And so even if you opine in a high level API, because you believe that you can build a better privacy model, there's a chance that developers, just in order to circumvent that and to get that UI or that benefit, they can circumvent that and they can game you too. And so I'm fairly skeptical of high level ones helping you deal with privacy and security.
Great point. So I was going to kind of open it up to the room to talk a little bit about kind of the year in review and what we would like to potentially make sure that we continue doing or potentially change. But I think we only have 4 minutes left, which is probably not enough time for that exercise. But I did really like this format of kind of people getting to ask questions. I really appreciated Tom's question and all the points made. Yeah? Okay. Okay, if people are willing to kind of go over, we have an hour and 15 minutes for lunch, so maybe we just make that an hour. Or
Thomas, we have to be in the lunchroom. We're supposed to have a reservation, but we can get there until noon and we still have a table.
okay, so let's keep going for another 10, 15 minutes, and then head down. We'll still make it by noon. 10 minutes. Okay. Opening it up. Things that you are excited to continue or either stop. I will go ahead and start since I'm apparently talking. I am excited to continue cross-company collaboration. I have really appreciated the amazing work from both Microsoft and Intel in contributing to this project, and I'm excited for that to continue and to continue seeing you all in our monthly syncs. Something I am excited to stop doing or to improve is more scalable partner feedback and developer feedback. I think a lot of the stuff that we depend on to make these APIs is developers, obviously, and making sure that we can get feedback from developers, not only indicating their interest in various different APIs and what they'd like to see come to the web, but also the actual implementation of the APIs that we build and making sure that those are solving real problems. Who's got stuff to contribute? Or improve in... Alex is saying something. What are things that people would like to make sure that we continue doing or would like to change or improve on? Yes.
I'd say like relationships with developers that are building applications using our APIs. You can just like tweet something out, or if any of them raise a bug or concern, just like trying to jump on that and really help out the developers that are actually using these things, especially in our initial launch of things, to get the trust in the early adopters really invested.
So is that refining our process to sort of make sure that we have structured guidance for how to post on unstable basis? Get better at that, or that's something?
Sure, I think that'd be a good idea. I would also say, like, as a web developer, I spent a lot of time when I was looking for, like, if I was going to go look for a Bluetooth API, I probably would have looked on NPM first.
Mm.
You know what I mean? So like
meeting developers where they are.
Yeah, where they're at and saying, hey, look at this. You don't have to download anything. Just use this over here. Or making, a polyfill like we're doing for Serial. I have an NPM package that is a polyfill on top of Web USB, but it'll also just use the native Serial. Well, soon I'm going to add that because that's the first place they'll look. So just like engaging with developers and getting them excited and trusting these APIs.
And as a feature developer, how do you want to be getting or working with the rest of the team to get that feedback? So, right, for instance, like Pete will write a blog post. Sorry, so my question was how would we want to structure that process so that it works well for everyone? So I can imagine you may be feeling a little bit like in the early days, like Peter was saying, with push notifications, maybe we didn't have a lot of interest and we could handhold everyone, but then maybe it blows up and everyone's using it and you feel overwhelmed. How do you imagine that process working to, start engaged and then get scaled feedback over time? And what do you imagine your commitment level being after you ship? Like you'll maybe move on to another API that you might start developing. How do you want to think about how engaged you want to be over time?
That's a good question. I would say that I would like to, you know, monitor like Stack Overflow and see who's talking about it, and just sort of general engagement and interest, and maybe even just like signing up for the right mailing list, so that if there is a developer who's talking about it or asking a question about it, making sure you engage with them as directly as possible.
I think what we have on
But
our
I
hands
don't know
is
of
a
any
potential
standard process.
breakout session for one of the later days to talk about better ways to get scalable feedback and how to specifically connect with developers as they're actually trying to use the thing. Hand over here.
Oh yeah, I like that also though.
We will add that to the list of breakout sessions.
One of the things that I'm excited for us to continue, which is something that whenever I join a group with everybody here, I always am really encouraged, because I feel like I get a very strong sense that people here are very dedicated to the web platform and the ecosystem of the web. And I feel like sometimes, especially if I'm reading lots of news, or especially like certain news websites, you'll get reading a lot of comments, and you'll get a lot of ideas around people acting in like maybe potentially, you know, Google or whoever's best interest and not the web's best interests. And I just see so much not that when I talk to coworkers and when I come to events like this, because I just really get a feeling that people, and I'm again excited for us to continue to really put the web first. And I feel that talking and hearing about this from everybody here.
Yeah, I'll definitely echo that and say that I think the amount of passion for the web as a thing that matters in this room is yeah, oh, we're fantastic. But I mean, I do think that a lot of times, you know, it's easy to look at headlines and other kind of news stories and see the fact that the world sometimes sees us as like a nefarious evil corporation. But the fact of the matter is that
Those things can be true together.
yeah, you know, very honestly. But yeah, +1.
I'd like to see us figure out how to do cross-company like launch review process better. Like I work with a lot of Intel developers trying to launch features, and you know, part of the problems we've had there are my fault, because I have oversubscribed myself on the number of features that I'm trying to launch on behalf of Intel. But the fact that I have to be involved in that process, and as we have these collaborators from Microsoft trying to help us out as well, like we need to figure out a way of building a process that works better.
Yeah, cross-company launch process.
To interrogate that slightly, I would love to understand from a non-Google perspective where folks see the sort of the black hole, right? Like there'll be a public process, and then black hole. I assume that's kind of how it feels. I'd love to understand more about what sort of participation data and evidence you'd like in that.
Yeah, so Microsoft's new to the Chromium project, so we're learning the process along the way, but it felt like we got a lot of great support from Google engineers, and we've landed quite a few changes this year. I think about like 1,000 commits so far. So I think we're learning the process. From our perspective, we really want to talk to customers, figure out their unmet needs. So we're talking to a lot of app developers. We're talking to people using Electron, people that want to build a PWA and feel that there's gaps, and trying to understand where are those gaps, how can we bring those forward. So I think just all of this seems to be happening in the open. There's standards bodies meetings. This is all going to be standardized. So I don't think we don't see a black hole yet. We're excited.
You might have just not passed the event horizon yet.
Yeah, so maybe ask us in 6 months. Like we do think like security is super important. There was Microsoft co-hosted with Mozilla a web privacy workshop just last week, and Google and Safari and other browser vendors, all the browser vendors were there. So I think there's a lot of interest on how do we build things that are privacy sensitive without harassing users, with more permission dialogues that they don't understand. So there's a lot of thinking in that space for the broad web, but a lot of that will affect Fugu as well, because these are strong capabilities that may increase fingerprinting, for example. So how do we both bring new capabilities to the web but don't make fingerprinting worse?
Yeah, I think working out the security and permission model is definitely something that we can improve on in the cross-company sense.
Yeah, so the other person who should definitely comment on this is John Jansen, because he's been super engaged in the Fugu engineering aspect.
Yep.
But I think one of the things that is sort of a meta thing to figure out is, like, for example, more insight into what you're prioritizing and when and why, and how for things where we see that it's landing in a certain Chromium release, but we have a partner who wants it sooner. Like, how do we engage on something like that to help land it sooner, or just sort of a deeper understanding of almost a shared backlog, shared priorities, all that kind of stuff. Because especially when we see something that you guys are already working on, it's like, okay, cool, they've got it covered. But in some cases, it's like maybe, or, maybe we have some like subtle things in what we would have spec'd out function. Like, we have a different partner who's asking for the same type thing, but maybe subtly different, and finding the right person and the right in-depth. Like,
I'm personally really excited about improving our cross-company partner story and making sure that, as we're working with all these different people, that we can share this kind of information, because we rely so heavily on partners for both prioritization and actually building the thing. Yeah. Yeah, and I assume that some of these partners we're both talking to, and like.
Yes, actually, I just wanted to add to that point. So maybe from Microsoft, we can just gather more feedback about like Windows and desktop point of view. So we want to be like a forerunner of those like customer feedback, and reflect those asks to Fugu project from our point of view as well. So balancing between like mobile and desktop asks, and prioritizing those feature capability implementation would be really, great point of collaboration, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And I think with that, we are going to go to lunch and hopefully continue all of these conversations.